There's an ancient story of a student who went to the master and said, I pray, I study, I meditate, do my daily rituals, and I even fast a little. I live in peace with others. Teacher, what more can I do? The master rose, lifted his hands, stretched his fingers out towards the heavens, when suddenly they became like 10 lamps of fire. And then he said, you can become all flame. Welcome. I am Jareth Tempest, a mystic, magician, psychonaut, astronaut, hierophant, all-around seeker of truth, author, full-time weirdo, and host of this show, where we talk about mysticism, the mystical journey, and all that's magical in the universe. Everything from spirits to spirituality, while I take you on a magical mystery tour through the inner worlds, and hopefully inspire you to take that next step so that you can become all flame. Okay, well, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here this week. So, not exactly... I didn't have this episode planned, and what I was going to talk about, I'm just going to have to probably talk about it at another point, because something happened, and it's one of those things where, at least in this aspect of my life, but really in almost everything, it's one of those moments where there's a before that happened and an after that happened. And so it was really a major spiritual awakening, we'll call it. You know, something major has happened, and I've gotten to something major has happened, and I've progressed further on my journey in a way that is, frankly, it's life changing. So I wasn't going to be able. I'm never going to be able to talk about things the same way again. So I wanted to at least talk about this a little bit, so that people have, or at least the people who listen to the show, will have a bit of context. So, but what that makes me want to talk about is not, I don't want to sit here and just talk about what I went through. I figured that this is actually a good time to just talk about spiritual awakenings and what they are, and some of the different kinds that people commonly have. Now, this is no way going to cover everything and the entire spiritual life. There's so many different kinds of thing, and something else to always keep in mind is that I'll always be speaking of each of these in a very general way, and every single one of these, when that happens to somebody, it happens in a very personal and unique way for them. And so my experience is not going to be the same experience as someone else, even though we might be going through the same process. It's going to be different. And so just keep that in mind, and don't try to think that what I'm saying is the only way that these things ever happen. All right, let's get started. So the very first thing that happens is kind of what we usually call a spiritual awakening. It's when you first wake up to the fact that reality is not what you've been told that it is. And, this obviously happens in a lot of different ways. And I think one of the first ways it happens here in America, I can't speak for how it works everywhere around the world, but one of the first things that happens in most people, usually in their teens, is they realize that the history that they're being taught in schools is not the real history. It's kind of it's there. They're not being outright lied to. It's just being glossed over and simplified, and the nuances being removed and things like that. Of course, they're trying to teach kids thousands of years of history. Obviously, it's going to be, tinkered with some. So, but you start finding some of the mistakes in that. And then also, we, at least with my generation, we grew up in the drug war, and we were told very specific things would happen if you tried drugs, and then inevitably we try drugs and those things don't happen, and we realize that, the government lies to us. What we're being taught in school is not the whole truth, and it sets up that initial doubt in the system. And then what often follows after that is almost immediately are the conspiracy theories. I remember we were in high school. I think I was probably a junior, and the first time I heard of the Illuminati, and people talking about, oh, the Illuminati really runs everything. Now, the definition of the Illuminati that I heard at that point was that, Europe had had these super rich families that, had maintained their generational wealth from, the Renaissance and earlier, the aristocracy of Europe, and they've hidden their money in various ways so that people don't realize exactly how rich they really are. And, and they're secretly pulling the strings of everything in Europe. I mean, in the world. So that was how the Illuminati was introduced to me at the time. Obviously, that is not the definition that most people know, and it keeps going on and on. And I don't want this to be about conspiracies, but this is when and it doesn't have to happen in teenage years. This can happen at any point. My mother didn't have this awakening until much more recently when she's Native American, and what happened at Standing Rock was really personal to her, and we had family that went, and the things that were happening there really woke her up to the fact of what the government is willing to attack its own people to protect oil investments. And, and that woke her up because she'd always been like, no, like, the they work for us. The police are our friends. The FBI is our friend. She didn't have that kind of awakening until much later in life. And so, it doesn't always happen as a teenager, but then almost always it's like, well, if I can't believe that, what is true? And you start really doubting everything. And this is when you're very vulnerable to misinformation and people who will manipulate information for their own ends. And basically, this is when when it's really easy for you to be fooled into, joining a cult, or if not a cult, but a cult of personality or something. So that's a danger at that point when you don't know who to trust, and then so you find someone that seems to be kind of telling you what you think might be true, and maybe confirming some of your own biases and stuff, and that's how you end up maybe going down the wrong path for a while or something. So that's kind of the danger of that initial realizing that things happen now aren't happening the way that you thought it was. Now it becomes a spiritual awakening when you realize the same way that what you've been told about history and not being the full truth. Well, what you're being told about the spirit world, and finding out, oh, well, that's not really true. And this mainly, again, like Christianity being the mainstream religion here in America, and at least even if you weren't raised in the church, in some form of the church, you probably still picked it up culturally. And you start finding out, angels aren't just happy people with wings who show up at Christmas time. They were, the whole biblical accurate angel thing that you see on the internet now, and like, oh, well, they're horrifying. Or that fairies are not necessarily the little cute things that fly around with butterfly wings, but can be actually pretty horrifying. And then and you might find out, oh, well, demons aren't really evil or whatever. But whatever it is that first starts awakening you to that. And then sometimes it is psychedelic drugs or something where you have an experience with that, and one of the main things that happens, and this isn't just with the drugs, but with any experience, is whenever you start realizing that there's something else out there, and you get that first pushback, or that first time that something else talks to you or makes some kind of movement towards you in some way, and it's like, oh wow, this is real. There's a spirit world going on out there that is much more real than what anything has ever made it seem like. And then, and then at that point, then you start trying to just figure things out and read books, talk to other people, join groups, and whatever, you've been through it. So, if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably already passed this point. So that's that initial spiritual awakening, and at that, and after that, you're usually trying to scramble to find somebody who can tell you what's going on. And and again, that's when it can be dangerous, because you might fall into somebody who's lying to you and misleading you and trying to manipulate you. So you always got to keep your eye open for people who are, well, frankly, trying to sell you something. And usually, if it's themselves, that's a dangerous thing. If they're trying to sell themselves as the one who has all of the answers or something, that's something you should always look out for. One of the next kinds of spiritual awakenings that people at least ask about, and it's not one that I really had a major. It wasn't a big deal for me. We call it where people call it the third eye opening. You got to open your third eye, and I mean, what that basically boils down to is just learning how to you work with your chakras, and you learn how to open your chakras up so that the energy can flow. And the third eye is simply your chakra that's kind of in charge of your psychic abilities. And again, it doesn't matter that it doesn't mean that suddenly you're super psychic and can see and hear spirits. That's what a lot of people seem to think it is. It's like, oh, teach me to open my third eye so I can see the spirits. Well, yeah, you may or may not. And really, again, it's just learning how to open your chakras, and you get that one open, and you get more psychic information, and working through your energetic system and just moving energy through you and stuff, and working with your chakras and things like that will improve your psychic abilities, whatever they are. It doesn't mean that you're suddenly going to be super psychic, but it could. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying that most of the time it's just a subtle enhancement of what's there, and you start to realize that maybe some of the information that you've been taking in all this time was not really through your five senses, but through that extrasensory perception. So it's usually not the big mind-blowing experience a lot of people expect it to be. And this is one of those times when people get disappointed, and they definitely get mad at me for telling them this. Like, it's not necessarily going to be what you think it is. Now, what happens though is, like, as when we're children, we usually have much better psychic abilities than we do as adults, because along the way someone's taught us to either be scared of it, or we've just kind of scared ourselves from it because we didn't like what we were seeing, and basically just because our culture doesn't accept it as a real thing. We either we listen to somebody tell us to stop doing it, or we scare ourselves into stopping, or we just stop because we don't believe in it ourselves. And so there is a process of trying to reawaken what we maybe shut down within ourselves. But that's not really opening the third eye. The opening of the third eye is working with that chakra. But yeah, there is and this is one thing that, if people want to develop their psychic abilities, mostly what they need to do is just find some psychic practice and do it, and try to undo the damage that was done to them as children that made them quit being psychic in the first place. And really, one of the best things that you can do is just use your imagination. Just start imagining things and fantasizing and playing pretend like you did when you were a kid. And that will awaken way more than you imagine it will. So yeah, that's your third eye opening. And obviously, if you're into Hinduism or yogas or any of that stuff, then this can be a little bit more of a part of that. I'm not part of any of that, so I don't know all of the details that they may be going into about a lot of these things. So, you may hear something different from someone who practices this as part of their tradition. So the next step really would be the next big awakening you're probably going to have after you open your third eye would probably be your making contact with your guardian angel, your holy guardian angel, which I have talked about here already. So I highly suggest going and checking out those episodes if you have more, if you want to know more. But basically, everyone has a guardian angel, or typically it's called a guardian angel, but what it really is a spirit who is intertwined with your spirit and acts as the voice of God for you. And it is mainly concerned with your spiritual development, and will also help you in a lot of things. Magically they'll help you work with other spirits and stuff. And so, it's something that is with you now, and it's always been with you, and it's just a matter of learning how to be quiet and know yourself well enough to hear it. So whereas like the challenge with your initial spiritual awakening is trying to figure out what's really going on, the challenge of your opening your third eye is learning how to use your energy system. The challenge of learning to hear your holy guardian angel is to know yourself and to be silent so that you can hear it and recognize it, and to trust in all of this. And you should be learning to trust your intuition. So those are the lessons that you need to be learning to and when working on to achieve these awakenings. The next one that you might run into is typically called the dark night of the soul. And this is a term that has become very popular the last few decades and is being misused dramatically, especially by like people who don't even believe in a spiritual life but want to use it as a psychological thing. But the point basically of what the dark night is whenever you first start becoming very spiritual, the spirits are going to take care of you, and like you're going to feel like you're on fire, and you can do anything. And then all of a sudden one day it's almost like they went away and they left you all alone, and you have to figure it out yourself now. And all of the fun that was there and the ease, that all goes away, and suddenly spirituality becomes work. And that's the dark night of the soul. And it can sometimes come with depression or physical illness or challenges, but not necessarily. But the one thing that always comes with it is this what we call spiritual dryness, which is just the lack of joy and pleasure from anything spiritual. Doesn't matter if you're a religious person who's trying to pray or meditate, or if you're a magician who's suddenly, doing those daily rituals or your magic routine suddenly is just like, it's just like pulling teeth trying to get the effort to, the motivation to do it. That's what the dark night is. And while there's a lot of debate on this, I personally feel like the dark night of the soul and crossing the abyss are the same thing. The difference is that the dark night of the soul happens to you it's thrust upon you, whereas crossing the abyss is a magician doing it on purpose, because we need to go through the dark night to grow up as magicians, or to mature spiritually. Because if the spirits are doing all the work for us and making us happy and making us enjoy everything, then we're not really doing it ourselves. And so the struggle is to learn to do it ourselves. And that's what the dark night is for. And that it is to mature and to continue having that mature thing. Don't think that, don't do these things for bragging rights, because it'll just make it last longer. Because if you're doing it for an immature reason, then you might not be ready for it, and it'll just last longer. It'll have to take longer. And I mean, even when you're ready for it, it can take a while. It took me 7 years to get through the dark night. And I mean, there's a lot of external reasons for it. Like, I was still in prison and still deeply Catholic when it happened. And what needed to happen was for me to discover magic and to begin that move away from Catholicism. And it took me a long time to do that, and so that's why it did drag out the way it did. That might be what has to happen. You know, there's certain things that you need that are, it's going to try to push you to do, and there's certain things it's gonna, and on another as part of all of this is that you're gonna have to give up parts, things of yourself that you feel are sacred or important. Like, when I first started working with my holy guardian angel, it asked me basically to give up my dreams of what I wanted my life to be, and I didn't want to do that. And of course, like, a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to do that, but then it was kind of shown to me that if I followed my own course, I was leading to destruction. And whereas if I listened to them, then my life would be so much better and richer, and it has been. So yeah, if you find yourself in prison and the angels are telling you, hey, you know what, you might want to change, and you're like, no, I don't want to change, and maybe you listen to the angels and let them guide you out of the prison. Just saying. So, but so obviously my life was in a much more dramatic place at that. It might not be that dramatic for you, but there's still things that you're going to have to let go along the way, and sometimes it does mean taking your life in a direction you weren't expecting it to go. And sometimes you do have to make those leaps of faith, and sometimes you land and sometimes you don't, and that's just part of the beauty of the journey. And you're like, oh, well, that doesn't sound beautiful, that sounds horrifying and scary. Well, yeah, it's horrifying and scary, but then afterwards, like, it's so amazing. It's almost always for the best. And even when you mess up, like, I keep thinking about the cult thing, and like, I've watched the shows on the Nexium cult, and like, and how that group was really helping people for a while on certain levels and aspects, but they basically had taken cognitive behavior therapy and weaponized it and monetized it, and it turned it into a pyramid scheme. But the cognitive behavior therapy does help people, and especially when you first start doing it, it can clear up a lot of the little things that are plaguing you, and suddenly your life is better. You're like, oh, well, this works, and then suddenly you're sucked into a cult, and the next thing you're doing, you're getting cult leader's name branded on your inner thigh. It's just every step along the way you have to look out and be careful that you're not falling into someone else's ego trap. So, Dark Night of the Soul, Crossing the Abyss. Crossing the Abyss, I'm not going to go into the details of how to do it because I don't want to accidentally send someone racing to the abyss. If you're interested in it, I would go to like Google Frater Ocker Crossing the Abyss. He has a really great article about it. But basically, the abyss is divinity at its most exposed, which to our senses is nothing. And so the abyss is this part of, like, we call it like the astral, that is just a gaping maw of nothing. And you cross through the nothing. And while you're exposed to that vast nothing, the joy and everything of your life is drained away. And what happens is it begins a purging that's kind of a cyclical purging, whereas you'll be okay and things will seem great, and then suddenly you'll go back, the dryness and the purging will come back, and it's basically, a lot of those negative feelings and traits and emotions will have to come out of you and pour out of you. And the more you've built up, the more you'll have to purge out. But yeah, it's a cyclical thing. And a lot of people will think, oh, well, I did it and then it's over and that was hard, but now I'm past. It's not over. You're going to be good for a few weeks or a few months, but then it'll hit you again, and you're going to have to go back through that process of that purging. But it gets better, and each time it gets better, and each time you become more yourself and less who the world wanted you to be. And you're going to be more happy with yourself and more fulfilled in your life. And that's the process, that's the goal. And that's like, there's the group out there that their whole goal is to become a living God. And to me, the goal is to become a living human, to become a truly authentic person, and to be what we were meant to be, what we're supposed to be, what we want to be, and not to just be, have godly powers that, to what? To get, rich, to get, sex. It's like, yeah, we need things to help us along the way, and there's nothing wrong with using magic for that, but the magic powers are a means to an end, which is to enable us to continue to grow without having to, spend our lives working for somebody else. The magic powers are not an end to themselves, like to just do things because you can do things. So that's, and that's one of the things you learn along the way as well. So, but crossing the abyss is usually considered one of the, after you finish that process, you should be like a full-blown adept. You're good. You're pretty far along. Another kind of awakening you might have would be the kundalini awakening or the kundalini rising. Again, I'm not into yoga, so I'm not going to be able to give you the details of what this all is and what it means, but it's a real thing. It has happened for me. It happened rather late for me, so by the time I did it, it didn't really mean as much. I didn't get as much out of it. Because again, it's not. I think if it happens early in your spirituality, it's going to be super intense and eye-opening. But by the time I did it, I'd had so many attunements that my energy system was already in good shape, and all of my energy channels were already really nice and wide. And so when that energy when I finally knew to rise that energy up, it had plenty of room. It wasn't being forced through anywhere. I guess can't help but think of the joke with throwing a hot dog down a subway tunnel. But yeah, there was the energy channels were already pretty wide for me. So that raising that energy up and lifting it up was not hard. It was not a painful or life-altering experience. It was good, and it's definitely something that it definitely energized me, and there was there's absolutely it's absolutely a real thing. I just think that I did it too late for it to be the great amazing thing. I think I missed out on that, but it was still really cool. And like, whenever I work with that energy today, it always leaves me like way more energized, and everything is more effective, and so yeah, I can't, I'm not the guy to really explain much about kundalini. So all that happened. So that's all. And again, all of this is almost all stuff that needs to happen. I'm not going to say early in your life, but early in your career as a magician. This is all your growing pains and the things that you're going to have to go through to become mature as a magician or a mystic or whatever it is, whatever path you're on. These are things that usually the mystic just lets come to them, and then it happens, and they go through it, and then the magician will more actively make these things happen. They'll do rituals that will alter their fate pattern so that this happens, and so that's the difference between the paths. And so yeah, what's that point? Then you reach like you're once you've gone through all of these, then you're truly an adept, and things will work for you in a much better, easier way. Most spirits will be much more friendly for you and more cooperative. They're going to have a lot more respect for you because you've gone this far. And then if you're willing to give back to them, then they'll be even much more happier for it. And I don't mean give back to them in an offering way, but in a way that helps them. Like, are you willing to work with the nature spirits around you to make this a place where they can thrive? You know, that's the kind people get offerings all mixed up. It's it's the mundane work that you're doing, that you should be doing to help them to thrive, and not just like a thank you thing. You know, that's really the best kind of offering that you can give a spirit is stuff that will make them their particular area of existence work better for them. And in some degree, every spirit is a nature spirit. So you just have to find the area that they need help in, and or just don't even ask what it is that they want, and just work with them in a more blind kind of way, and just say, okay, give me what you need me to have, and then take it from me when you need me to take it, when you need to take it from me. Because there's an energy transfer that is constantly going on, that and again, as you get further along as an adept, you'll become more aware of these things and how the spirit world is working around you, and you just need to become a part of that, and not just be in it and for yourself. Because the more you're in it just for yourself, the harder everything is going to be. So and don't think that because and if you do all this, they're going to take care of you. You're going to get everything you need. They're going to be much more respectful of you, and they're going to recognize, oh, you need those weird little green pieces of paper. Okay, we'll bring you more of those. Just keep helping us this way, and we'll help you that way. It becomes that kind of a relationship, as opposed to, I am the great and mighty Oz. Bring me the things I want, and that's more what it's about. So let's see, we've got about a little over half an hour. So I don't know how much longer to really talk about this, but I do kind of want to cover what's been going on with me lately. So I'd mentioned part of my contemplative meditation process. There was a time several months ago when kind of everything on my desk began to kind of just blot out as it became nothing, and everything around me became nothing. It wasn't really nothing, it was God, but in God in that sense of like in the abyss, the void, something that's imperceptible to our five senses. And so the only way we can experience it is for it to be nothing. And that's what everything became. And it was kind of scary, and it definitely really shook me. And then the next experience was that one I was talking about, where in like one of the first episodes, or maybe the first episode, where it felt like, I think I was in what in the Kabbalist call Hakma, the domain of wisdom, the supernal realm of just, because I forgot who I was. I forgot that I was a person, and I was just one with everything, but not in a sense of I really knew anything. I felt the oneness and the connection with everything, but I wasn't given any answers at the time. Like, I didn't necessarily understand reality any better for it. It was just an experience that I'd had of being at one with everything, and just the feeling that that has, which in and of itself, that was just a mind-blowing type experience. Um, so that happened, and when that one happened, it definitely felt like I was on the right track and things were happening, and I knew that things were happening. And a lot of things were coming, where my life was moving very fast at the time. We were heading into a big move, and we invited someone to come over and just to meet them, and they ended up staying and becoming, a magical partner and stuff. And there's all this just amazing things happening. And then the move started happening. And then the whole time it was like, okay, there's a ritual I need to do. It's not one I found in any book. It was just one that I intuitively knew needed to happen. And there's a few different traditions that you could almost say that this kind of came from. So in alchemy, there's the process of, in the first stage, the black stage, you burn everything off, and that's burning away your negativity and that negative aspect. And that's almost everything that we've been talking about, all these different awakenings. And then you go through the phase of the white phase, where after you burn everything, things turn white. And then after that, the next phase is gold. Everything turn or yellow. Things turn yellow, and I think it's a bacteria or something. I don't even remember exactly how it works. But then there's the final phase where things turn red, and red kind of is the philosopher's stone, and it's that final color of unity. And one of the things there is that it's a marriage between the opposites, and it's the male and the female come together. It's where you unite yourself with your holy guardian angel to a degree. It's like a marriage between you and your holy guardian angel, and you become one. And so this is what I needed to accomplish. And so we did a ritual, and I won't get into the details, but yes, it was a sex ritual, because sex was needed for this. And this is much like when Crowley was doing the Aethers, and he reached the point where he needed to have that homosexual experience, and experience it from the female perspective, and to help destroy the ego. And because when we say ego in the spiritual sense, the ego is not what we understand from Freud. It's more of it's like a false persona, but also your sense of self. That sense that keeps you, that you're a being separate from anything else. Because if we're working towards non-duality and being at one with everything, your idea that you are separate is a hindrance to that. And so that's what we mean by the ego. And you need to do things to overcome that. And one of the things that sometimes we need for that is a sexual experience. A certain type of sexual experience. Not the same type for everybody. It's different for everybody. For Crowley, it was being the bottom in a homosexual coupling, and for John Dee, it was a wife swap. It can be any number of different things. And again, not everyone's going to need it to be sexual, but sometimes it happens this way. And for me, it needed to happen that way. So it was, this ritual with, it was this really long, elaborate Enochian evocation I'd come up with using the language. And, I summoned Mars into them, and Galva, the female goddess of angels and the mother of demons, into me. And, we had a threesome there and I completely, lost myself within that. And then there was, and we incorporated the yellow and the red, and that transformation into the red. And so, this is a really personal thing to talk about, so I don't want to get into too much detail of it, but it was a very beautiful thing, and it was definitely a very life-changing ritual that was very draining afterwards. I'll say that. It was I was very spiritually tired. But it was really such a beautiful thing. And again, that was one of those times when it was like there's before that and then there's after that. Well, and then that happened again just the other day on Saturday. I'm not going to go into detail about it. I will say that there was not a sex ritual. It was just me. My wife was around, but she wasn't participating. Although she ended up participating and not realizing it, because at a certain point she started answering questions that I was asking in my head. But really, to kind of sum up what it was, again, I used the Enochian system, but as I was going through the experience, I saw that this is something all traditions lead to. You don't have to follow my path. In fact, everyone has a path that they need to follow themselves, and it's laid before you. And you just have to find it. And the clues are there, and the hints are there, and it's almost like a trail of breadcrumbs leading you to where you need to be that you've laid yourself. Because remember, we are all one, which means that we are all God. And in some respects, we are all creators of our own life. And I don't expect you to really understand that the way I mean it yet, but anyway, what I ended up having was an experience of complete non-duality, and being aware of it, and being able to remember it, and being able to learn from it, and to experience literally everything everywhere all at once. Yeah, um, and to understand my place in it, and as a separate being, and what separateness means, and why we are separate, why we have this, and why it's not bad in the way we think it is. And that, but it explains where suffering, I understand much more intimately where suffering comes from and why we suffer. And it's not answers that most people will accept. And it's mainly because everyone is still very caught up within the suffering world, and that, and you have to learn through going through these different awakenings how to take a longer view of reality, and not just look at it as your suffering or your life, or even the sufferings of your people or of history, but to understand how all of it is playing out and what is going on. And the best way I can describe it is that God goes through a process of forgetting that they're God, and then lays out a trail that leads them back to remind them that they are God. And then they'll be God for a while, but then they'll need to forget that they're God again, and kind of go through that. Only it's much more complicated than that, but that's just trying to sum it up. And through that process, pain and suffering are a necessity. And I know that doesn't make anyone feel better that's going through anything right now, but it was really a beautiful, life-changing experience. And I feel like I'm probably going to be spending most of my life trying to articulate it better than this. So, but having had that experience now, I'm not trying to say, I'm anything special. That's totally against what all of this is about. It's not about being special or unique. I'm still going through absolutely everything everyone else is, but I just have that little bit more insight, and these things will keep coming, and we'll keep getting closer and having more experiences, and I'll share them with you, and we'll try to work through all this, and try to help other people have these experiences, and to live a better life. And then, yeah, we can make the world a better place, so it doesn't have to have all as much suffering. And wouldn't that be wonderful? So, all right, I guess we're going to go ahead, and I probably hit you with a whole lot of crazy you didn't expect right there. So Yep, sex rituals and being everything all at once. So yep, that's the magician's path for you there. I guess when I just close with again that final warning that yes, these things do need to happen, and I am specifically talking about the sex thing to some people in certain ways, but don't let someone pressure you into thinking that having sex with them is going to progress your path. You know, you'll know when it needs to happen and what needs to happen, or you'll at least have a good idea or whatever. Just don't. I'm not saying that you should not trust people, because you should, but you just always have to be careful and trying to make sure they have your best interest at heart, and that you have your best interest at heart, and that it's all about getting better and not falling into somebody's stupid scheme. But that's just the danger at every step along this. There's always a danger of misinformation, of bad gurus, and people who want to use you and abuse you. And so, get in touch with your holy guardian angel, and they will help guide you through all of that minefield. That's one of the things that they're there for, is to help keep you safe from things that are going to further distract you from the goal and take you down. But one thing that I will say about myself, my own path, is that it's not been a straight line. We've gone from being agnostic to kind of super scientific minded, to being, super Catholic, to being a magician, to, just fully embracing the mystical path and everything that entails, and then crazy sex rituals and stuff. It's not a straight path, and you never know where it's going to lead you. So I guess that'll be it for now. I feel a little bit better, but again, I was kind of nervous putting this out there. So anyway, that is what I've got for you this week. And there's a lot going on. I'm going to probably start doing this like every 2 weeks instead of every week. And then I'm going to have another show that we're going to start doing here in a couple of weeks. Well, it'll come in. But I've got a trip that I'm taking soon. And then after that, when I come back from that trip, I'm going to start releasing a lot more products in the store. I'm going to start doing servitor creation. I'm going to start doing ritual work at a certain point. And I'll start doing custom initiations again. And then for like something on a smaller, cheaper scale, I'll do like little chaos sigils for people that need that. So we got lots of new stuff coming. And then right now in the store, we're doing the Yahweh fusion, where we take your name and I give it to an expert in Kabbalah, and they will fuse your name with the name of Yahweh, and then give that to me, and I will create an attunement out of that. So it's a energetic connection that like deepens your connection with Yahweh. So if you're into that kind of thing, definitely check that out in the store. And and we've got all kinds of stuff coming. I'm pretty excited about everything. So but if you like this, give it a like, share, subscribe, good review, whatever you can do to help the channel. So, all right, well, I will see you next week. Bye-bye.